What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the Fusion Cast. I'm Jonathan Ridnour, and I'm excited that you guys are back with us because today we're going to be looking at what true dependency looks like on God in a biblical context. I think a lot of us would like to say that we are solely and truly dependent on God, but I wonder if that level of dependency or that level of confidence in that dependency would change if God would ask us or request from us to relinquish all control, or to lay down all our securities and all our comfortabilities and truly rely on Him. We're going to be looking at Judges chapter 6 for some guidance here today. And before we start reading, we have to understand a little bit of background, a little bit of context here. The Israelites had suffered 43 years of captivity up until this point. There's a lot of parallel that we could draw between us and the Israelites, because the Israelites, their relationship with God was never stayed the same. It was always changing based on their feelings or based on their circumstances. And a lot of times with us, we allow our relationship with God to be based on our feelings and our circumstances. We forget that God had brought us out of Egypt or brought us out of bad situations into His glory, into His goodness. And a lot of us, we lose sight of that based on our, like I said, circumstances or situations. We have to keep in mind, though, the Israelites, they had forsaken God, and they had turned to idol worship and casted God aside for their own desires, especially of the desires of their own heart. And since they had continued down this awful path, God had allowed the Midianites to invade their land and to destroy it. This is the truth for all of us, including the Israelites back in the day, that failure tends to follow us when we aren't following God. A lot of times we question God and say, God, why would you allow something bad to happen in my life? Why would you allow something like this awful to occur in my life? But as sometimes, it's not justified. Sometimes there are certain things, if we would do some self-reflection, that there are things in our lives that we are allowing to take, to hold precedence over God, and we put them above Him. And then we wonder why God has forsaken us. It's not that that God has forsaken us. It's that we have forsaken God. Judges chapter 16, verse 13 through 16, we see Gideon, and he says, "Pardon me, my Lord, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all His wonders and our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hands of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hands. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Like I had said, that the Israelites up until this point had been drifting farther and farther away from God into idol worship, ungodly marriages, and allowing ungodly cultures to take root and taint the people of God. What you realize in the context of this passage of Scripture, the cultural context, what was happening back then was the Israelites were allowing their captors to influence the Israelites' culture. They were allowing them to speak into their lives, and they were taking upon them their customs and their ways and their worship, and it was actually putting them farther and farther away from God. The Israelites, no matter who their captors were, found comfortability in captivity. And instead of freedom. We can often find comfortability in captivity and become okay with how things are rather than how things could be if we would follow God. See, when all you know is captivity, you can become comfortable in it. And the same as with our lives is when we're not following God, we can be comfortable with not solely following God and say that this is following God when in all reality it's not. You know, my wife can tell you that I love Oreos. If there's a pack of Oreos in our house, I could eat a whole sleeve in one night. But I think I can taste when there is a fake Oreo in the room. Like, I love Oreos that I can tell you which one's the Great Value brand and which one is the real deal. But if you had been eating Great Value brand Oreos up until this point, and then you had the real thing, you would never go back to the Great Value brand. You would stick with the double stuff Oreo because of how wonderful and how great it is. The same as with our relationship with God. I think a lot of times we've been stuck in captivity. We have enjoyed this life in the way that our culture has done things in this life and what we have accepted as normal. But if you would truly experience the life that God has for you, you would never go back to the way things were. You would just want to run towards the things that He has for you that you cannot see. And we have to take away from this passage of scripture that we can't allow ourselves to be okay with comfortability and okay with the way things have been and be stagnant in our relationship with God. We need to run full force into the things of God and the great things that He has for us. Sin can harm our relationships, your character, and most importantly, your relationship with God. The Israelites allowed their desires to conquer them, and in turn, it affected their spiritual and physical well-being. And so dependence, you have to understand that dependence means stepping out a lot of times. And a lot of us, we don't like doing that because that means stepping out in uncomfortable situations. How many of us have felt the urge to tell someone about Jesus? I can tell you right now, it's not a comfortable situation at all. How many of us have been led to go on missions trips and serve in ways that were uncomfortable? I can tell you that takes a form of stepping out, and especially with doing the will of God and what He wants for your life, it means that we need to be willing to step out and step beyond our comfortability. And so I think about this as an illustration. We had gone on a cruise ship, Carnival Cruise, which is awesome. Not right now. I can tell you that Carnival Cruise isn't doing well right now. But they have these dances on the cruise, and I remember, and I know I shouldn't be dancing, but I remember me and my wife, we decided we would go and do the Thriller dance from Michael Jackson, be taught how to do it. And I'm like the Tin Man. I can't move. I'm like the Tin Man without oil. But and I tell people this all the time. My hips don't lie. I can't dance. But I remember one time they had we were on a cruise and we were doing this dance and I was off in the back row. But I remember the music stopped. The director stopped, and he pointed back at me and he said, "You come forward." And I'm looking around, I'm thinking, this guy can't be talking about me. But he was talking about me, and he had me come forward, had me do the dance with him. And I tell you what, that made me even more uncomfortable. It was interesting because after that, he thought he had taught me, and he had me do the dance then. And he realized he had taught me nothing because I'm uncoordinated. And everybody on the ship knew who I was because that video had played on repeat throughout the ship the entire couple days that we were on there. And what is the story of all this? There may be times where God will put you into uncomfortable positions so that His glory and His strength and His power will be revealed. You will not be like me, where I would go up and the teacher hasn't taught me anything. You would go into this with confidence, knowing that God is going to bring you through. And when you rely on His power, you understand it's never anything that you could do. It's only through Him. And so we see this with Gideon's case, where Gideon was like, God, are you not going to do anything? God, are you going to intervene in this? And he's saying, I am going to intervene. I'm going to send you. So in all reality, what I would say to you is be careful what you wish for, because a lot of times in any situation, we say, God, are you not going to do anything? We look at the political sphere that we're in. We look at, with the COVID-19 and everything that's going on. We look at things that are going on overseas. We look at things that are going on in Africa, people, third world countries, and we say, God, aren't you going to do something? And I would say this to you, that the main point of stepping out, the before we even get there, sometimes God reveals to us things in our hearts and in our minds so that we would take hold of what God cares for. He needs people that are going to stand up for the orphan and the widow. The Bible talks about that throughout the Old Testament into the New Testament, where that's the job of the Christians, is to take care of the least of these. But a lot of times we're not willing to do that. But when God gives you, gives you a heart and He gives you compassion towards something, it's not just about speaking it or relaying it to other people, complaining about it. He's giving you that so that you will do something with it, that you will do something powerful with that. Because we have to understand that in my weakness, He is strong. It's nothing that I can do. It's everything that He will do through me that brings glory to His name. And so as a Christian, dependency means stepping out. And I'm going to make this fairly short, but as we look through all this, yes, Gideon had tempted God, but when Gideon was obedient, and even up to the point when he was leading the Israelite army and God had stripped all of them away except for 300, they were still able to overcome the massive Midianite army. Why? Because Gideon had a true dependence on God. It doesn't mean that you're not going to question God. It doesn't mean that you're going to ask, why am I the one that's doing this? But even with your complaining, if you were just obedient and truly dependent on Him and willing to step out, willing to step out of all this, God will use you for great things. God will use you for great things. In my heart, my prayer for you here today, especially with this COVID-19, I don't know what you could do and ways that you can serve. There's a lot of things that you can do, but off the top of my head, I'm drawing a blank here. But you can look up ways, or you can find ways to give to people in need, especially in this time, in this season. But you have to be willing to step out. No one ever feels like they're competent enough, because they're not. We understand as believers that the only competency comes from God's strength. And so I'm going to encourage you, go in God's strength, allow Him to use you, allow Him to speak into you, and allow yourself to step out and be dependent on Him. Thank you guys for joining me, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye. If you enjoyed that clip, make sure to hit that like button. If you want to keep up to date with future content, make sure to follow us on Facebook or subscribe to us on YouTube. This is the Fusion Podcast, where everything comes together.